suffering from her was great enthusiasm. My first warning from everyone. Welcome.
Thank you.
Well done. We had our summit at the end of the year. The refugee for you must have heard.
Yeah.
I hope that.
Yeah, it's such a lifetime.
Yeah. It's well, okay. So confession so far.
Yeah.
Ecosystem.
Hazard of a trade, yeah.
Exactly. So, but I would. Yeah, it's hard.
Hello, welcome back, everyone. Thank you for staying with us through the day. I'm really happy to be introducing our final discussion today. We're going to look back on the conversations we've had since this morning up to the workshop, have a little bit of reflection from our two co-chairs, Gudella and Cedric, and then open to discussion with our wonderful panel who've joined us for this last session. I will start with an introduction to the panel and then move back to feedback, if that's all right. We have with us Safak Pave, Senior Advisor at UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency. I cannot thank her enough for being here on such a busy day, seeing that it's World Refugee Day today, and you've been running from event after event on this important occasion for your organization, so thank you for being with us. Safak has a wide-ranging background embracing international and national public policy making and UN diplomacy. She has expertise in strategic public sector engagement and philanthropy, in humanitarian affairs, peace building, social and ecological policy, cities and cultural diplomacy, and UN Women and Peace Security agenda. She's been Deputy Speaker and member of Turkish Parliament representing Istanbul, has been part of the Ascension Committees to the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, and head of Secretariat at UN Human Rights. So thank you, Safak, for joining us. We have Rick Sammons, Director of Research at the International Labour Organization. Rick is also Sherpa to the G20 at the G7 and the BRICS processes at the ILO. And was previously founder and chairman of the Climate Disclosure Standards Board and managing director of the World Economic Forum, Director General of the Global Green Growth Institute. I'm making my panelists uncomfortable by listing their entire CVs. But most importantly, in Rick's illustrious career, he's a member of the Task Platform Board of Advisors and has been guiding us since the inception of the Task Platform on our connection of frontier issues being tackled by the International Labour Organization. So thank you for that, Rick. His new book, Human-Centered Economics, the Living Standard of Nations, touches on the type of wide-ranging collaboration and systemic rethinking that we've been talking about today. So thank you again, Rick, for joining us. And we have Fred Werner, who is Head of Strategic Engagement and Chief of Strategy and Operations at AI for Good at the International Telecommunications Bureau, it says here, the ITU Union. There we go. I was like, something's gone wrong there at the ITU. Fred was one of the original creators of the AI for Good Summit, which happened the week before last here in Geneva. And in that, he really focuses on connecting AI innovators with problem owners to collectively advance the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. He was Communications and Program Director of ETIS, the Global IT Association for Telecommunications, and Head of Marketing and Communications at the European Organization for Conformity Assessment. So we have a wealth of insights and experience on our panel today, and a huge thank you to all of you for being here. Before we dive into discussion with our panelists, I would like to invite Anne-Raphaëlle de Balmont once again to present her graphic recordings of the day. Have I caught you off guard, Anne-Raphaëlle?
Sorry, I was not expecting to now. Is it
Oh, sorry.
session? Because I just need to connect the screen and we will start. So let's do it a bit after.
I'll invite Cedric to to first feedback, and then we'll come back to you after a few thoughts from Cedric and Gudella on the day. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not going to be very long. You have heard us already, and most of you in the room. So just for the panel, I guess, members and those of you that just joined, the whole day was structured about the idea to have people think about complexity, but of course to start with silo aspects. So they were given two causal loop kind of a map, one on linking AI and the labor market, and the other one linking migration and labor market. And the inspiration, the main parts of the biggest part of inspiration from those drawing was actually two leading reports, one by the OECD on AI and labor market, and one by the World Bank on the World Development Report on migration in the 2023. Of course, this is, and the idea we wanted to have people kind of engage with the vision, or actually some of the assumptions that were behind those reports, as shown in basically from a system perspective, holistic perspective. And needless to say that none of the group was particularly happy with some of the things. Actually, the subjective interpretation of this report done by myself and the teams. But the idea was to try to really think of connections that are maybe not covered, and in the end to try to connect and to either those working on the migration causal loop or those working to the AI thing. And in the end, they come up with, I think, my take on it is there's a lot of, optimism in terms of trying to really kind of connect the thing and connect the areas for positive, for good. But also some kind of course, necessity to take more social or more, ethical consideration into account than, let's say, the OECD report would do. And of course, it's a particular type of organization, or, some of the aspect on migration also that would actually be more related to conflict than maybe the World Bank would actually like to proceed to. So I think in the end, the objective, first of all, was to get people stay in the room for the different stages, which obviously has worked. Whether they hate us after that or not, you'll ask them. But and also to try to see how, given the complexity, they could connect and think of intervention in the system that are joint. And this is where it connects to you, Ben, because you are involved in large initiative with lots of actually stakeholders, and how this is not simply a PR exercise, but it has concrete effect of doing intervention in a more efficient but also more legitimate way. And I think the participant, they face a lot of uncertainty in what they actually proposed, and they probably want to hear a bit of more specific solution of things that have worked or maybe that are particularly challenging from that perspective. This is where I will stop. And Kudela, where are you? Are you here? So you have a mic or? Okay.
Yeah, maybe just one thing that really struck me we asked everybody also to reflect on how uncertainty is in all of this a difficult thing. But then I guess we heard one group that with the name of leveraging uncertainty, which I think a very important kind of point to say, currently uncertainty is very much leveraged by people that probably we don't want to reign countries. And we need to learn to leverage uncertainty in a different kind of way, and beyond just the rosy picture, then everything will be fine. I mean, migration is great because we have labor shortages in the north and whatever, and AI is great anyway because it will help us learn from huge data and whatnot. But to have a more realistic and good way of talking about uncertainty and some starting points I thought I heard from some of the groups around that, where again I think it's this mix of how much is it kind of person-centered things? And lots of you talked about education, obviously, for AI and digital literacy and all these things. But on the other hand, then also what sort of the structures that will enable people to, on the one hand side, migration, on the other hand, AI development, have a more proactive role in that. And I guess obviously everybody currently is talking about AI governance, but anyway, all these kind of structures that whatever how constraining, but also enabling action. And I really like that. I think in some of your groups, you kind of mix the two. So I think there's a lot of kind of starting points, as Cedric was saying, and with maybe the actual overall goal of, I mean, we had this kind of topic of unknown as the headline. How do we make this unknown actually a good selling point for ourselves? So maybe as one challenge to the panel also. Thank you. Over to you.
So I don't want to repeat the same things. I think the words that comes more often in the conversation was equity, and equity in many senses. Social, health, access to AI or access to job, but especially the focus was on the ethics in AI and the bias in algorithm. And as you can see, it was a very intense session, and we can see on the drawings the complexity and the richness of your exchanges. It's a bit overwhelming, as one of the group mentioned. And you can see as well with these many rows, which is not exhaustive, all the interconnections between the topics. And I think this exercise of system thinking was very interesting for that. Yeah, it was quite funny, as the question of uncertainty, people were in the room were so reluctant to answer, and Cedric was forced each time to ask, can you answer this question? And I don't know, maybe because it's the academy, it's human, first of all, and maybe most of you are from academic background and you don't like it. And so the answer, they come more from startup profile, if I understand correctly. And I really liked this part because we can feel the creativity with the idea of fail fast and imagine and maybe use AI for provocative prediction. And it's visual intelligence and visual language. So I am really going for that. To picture the overview, to not feel too lost, and highlight the gray spots, and mapping to permanent migrations and evolutions. And yes, so to mitigate the risk. So I don't go in all the details, and I give back the mic.
Thank you so much for concisely summarizing some of the issues that we've grappled with through our discussions today. I would love to turn to our panelists with a quick warm-up question, just to react to some of what we've heard and to reflect on how this topic we've been speaking about of uncertainty and the unknown comes into your work and your initiatives on a daily basis. Perhaps we could start with Rick, since you're next to me.
Okay, thank you very much, Katrona. Thanks to you and Cedric and Gardella for inviting me to this conversation on this specific question of uncertainty and how does it influence or take expression in our work in the ILO. I suppose it's difficult to give you a general answer to that. Let's take the AI and the labor markets example, since you seem like you've been spending quite a bit of time on that today. This is a new space. We're a 100-year-old institution that has put together a couple hundred norms, conventions, recommendations, as we call them, and whatnot. And the AI is raising a large question, which is how fit for purpose are they in going forward, given the increased automation of all sorts of economic activity? And that's basically a question about uncertainty. People don't know exactly how this is going to play out. This technology is going to play out. And I would say to you that, the sort of natural instinct on a unbounded, ambiguous challenge like this is to just, begin with dialogue, which is kind of what you're doing here. And then you want to have some degree of analysis to have a little bit more informed dialogue. And we ourselves have not put out a report on AI in the labor market like you were looking at earlier with the OECD. We have started a little bit more technically, if you will. We're the repository of the world's official labor surveys that are done by statistical agencies. And so we have basically done a working paper, a piece of work that examines, including with the application of AI to our data, what is the likely effect on the labor markets from AI, and particularly GPT AI, to try to take apart a little bit the uncertainty here and this amorphous question and break it down a little bit. And for those of you who are interested, all this is, of course, publicly available as an IO. I'll give you just the top line of that, and that is that we see basically this being largely an augmentation story. In other words, it could enhance as opposed to purely replace people's jobs at a, almost 5 or 6 to 1 ratio. If you look across, we looked at 430 different occupational categories, if you will. But that may sound reassuring, but it's not, because really if you look at the full picture of the data, including the big chunk of occupations in the middle where you can't quite tell whether they are particularly exposed to substitution, replacement, or they're particularly exposed to augmentation, that is, people could actually become more productive with the technology. If you take a look at that entire picture, you're looking at an increase in labor market churn. Either people losing their jobs or needing to transition and get upskilled or reskilled, one or the other, to stay current, even if they're in an augmentation exposed occupation, of a very significant margin. And that has huge implications for societies. We're already dealing with a lot of labor force underutilization, with increased migration and trying to integrate people into the workforce, crises and shocks and constriction in some respects of trade. So if you layer on top of that an extra 10 to 20% amount of labor market churn, and then you layer on top of that further the net zero transition that most countries have at least rhetorically said they're going to undertake, you're looking at a very significant amount of what you would call in this setting a societal change, that is potentially upheaval and disruption. And therefore, even though on an incremental basis, with this granular look at the data, it may look manageable, the reality is that it has huge implications for public policy, including fiscal policy, because we're going to need to significantly increase in people's transitions, their security during those transitions, and their training and education on a lifelong basis. That's big stuff for economic policy generally. So I guess I'll close on this one by saying, look, uncertainty can paralyze, but the role particularly of an international organization like ours can be to help kind of break the problem down a little bit, not only provide a space for inclusive discussion, whether intergovernmental or multi-stakeholder, and we can get into that dimension a little bit later about what are some of the challenges in solving for both. But we can try to use the analytical capability that the international community has invested in our institutions for the purpose of beginning to better inform decision-making in governments. And I just given you one small example of how we do this in this particular uncertain area, but there are multiple other areas where we and the other IOs try to do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rick. Can we stick on the theme of AI perhaps and come over to Fred, this area of uncertainty that you've been in this space, I think, pre splurge of AI. What's your take on the uncertainty angle?
Yeah, thank you. And that's a great question. I think with regards to uncertainty or change rather, I think it's the only thing you can count on. I mean, if you had to put your money on anything, it's that things are going to change and they're going to be uncertain. And if you look in the context of AI, when we created AI for Good in 2017, there was a lot of hype at the time. If you remember, you had Elon Musk and Stephen Hawking saying we've summoned the devil and we have to watch out. At the time, it was largely unsubstantiated. I think today there's more proof in the pudding behind these solutions. But still, we thought, okay, there might be something here. And at least in terms of advancing the SDGs, let's already start to investigate what practical solutions are out there that could be used to, advance climate change or, affordable healthcare or education for all or more high-tech solutions like robotics or autonomous driving. So I think all the use cases are there. But I think what's changed with regards to uncertainty is the speed of change, really. So we've seen this acceleration where back in 2017, when we did a first summit, you could pretty much keep up with the topic year by year. I mean, you had to educate yourself and read and be in the know somehow. But as the years went by, that went to half a year and then it became a month. And now I would argue it's weekly or daily. I mean, that's how fast things are moving. And when you're looking in the context of, dealing with that speed of change, and, governments are not typically known for moving fast. But I would say on the topic of AI governance, they have moved quite fast. I mean, you have to give credit where credit's due. So if you're looking at the EU Safety Act or the Hiroshima process in Japan or the Biden executive order, or even in China, they're very advanced in certain AI governance aspects. I think the good news or the encouraging news is that everyone has sort of risen to the call and has woken up and is moving very, very quickly. And I think if you're looking at AI governance globally, there's all these processes moving at full speed, and they do have more in common than they have different. And what we tried to do at this year's summit, we had an AI governance day where we're looking at, okay, what do they have in common? Which of these aspects apply domestically? And then focusing on the aspects that apply internationally. And then how can we move from basically principles to implementation and try and find practical ways to move from these ambitious words and texts, which are great, they're emerging in new regulations and policies and governance frameworks. But how do we actually implement these things? Because there's a huge gap between the ambitions and the skills, knowledge, and expertise that currently exists in governments and institutions and new bodies that are being created to respond to this. And one of the tools that we found that could be leveraged is standards. I mean, ITU being a standards setting body, we have 220 standards on AI, either developed or in development. And if you're looking at sort of the biggest pain point or headache, whether you're north, south, east, or west, at least one thing that emerged from the summit was the epidemic of misinformation and deepfakes, which I'm sure probably underscored many of the discussions you had here today. I wasn't here all day, but I would imagine. And basically, how can we, create tools to detect deepfakes? So to see if an image or a text or a soundbite or even a data set has been altered, or if it's been generated by AI, or on the contrary, to prove if it's actually true, it's authentic. So we launched an AI standards coalition on deepfakes and watermarking at the summit, and I think that's sort of one example of how people have reacted quite quickly to a great common concern. But I think back to the issue of change. I mean, there's a saying: if you want to know the outcome of something, show me the incentives, right? And I think that's where, whether you're looking at, labor markets, maybe if you're looking at taxation as maybe a carrot or a stick or an incentive, depending how you look at it, or if you're looking at big institutions, how are you going to recruit the talent to audit large language models when a college graduate with, machine learning is being recruited to big tech for $500,000 a year? Why would they go on a government salary to audit those big tech companies? So there's a lot of things where the incentives are not really aligned with the outcomes that we'd like to see, whether it's in big institutions or the future of work, or even in the big tech companies themselves, right? If the incentives were changed, maybe you'd have different types of products and business models emerging. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I think the speed of change is just going to accelerate. So being comfortable with uncertainty and change is, I think, mandatory now. AI is not helping, but AI might be a tool to actually, on the flip side, help counter that as well. But I think, again, returning to the incentives, what are the incentives that are actually in place that could help on all these different levels, whether it's government or markets or business, that could be sorted out? Because I think the incentives right now are just simply not there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You and Gudela can have a new initiative to make us all more comfortable with uncertainty. Raising that topic. Safa, could we come back to you and how this hits the ground in your space?
Sure, Kitrona, I'll be very honest, as you have invited me, and then there was one concern of mine that this is not my area of expertise. I am merely somebody that is interested for personal reasons as well in the AI for medical improvements, and if actually it gets to the middle market where we can reach it at some day for different medical solutions, I will be a very happy person if I can see that in my lifetime with a limb or two that can be produced by AI that can function on behalf of me. But that's from my personal perspective. But rather than the AI area, by the way, UNHCR has invested for a decade or two now in an innovation service. So we, of course, try these kind of solutions that can be applied in our work grounds. That is not at all in my expertise, but we do have our experts in-house. But the areas let me start from the UNHCR perspective. UN Refugee Agency, that is represented, possibly the highest representation we have in the world amongst, or one of the top three. We are in 135 countries, in 550 locations, most of which are post-conflict no man lands areas as well. So that is the reason that we are the most represented. We are not only based in capitals, so because we are in the humanitarian service. Coming from that kind of background and having worked in the field, mainly Middle East, Southwest Asia, that includes a big spectrum from Iran, Afghanistan to Yemen to Syria, and you name it. I still, to this day, that's a region that I know, as we say, as an expression, as my palm, I would claim. But I cannot see in that region and in that humanitarian context, and at the face of so many erupting wars, conflicts still ongoing, as well as unresolved, protracted issues, as well as regime changes, layer by layer, the instability and unknown. So I'm actually speaking to the other topic now. I really do not know how to connect the employment sector issues vis-a-vis AI, the threats and the goodness of it, or not, the ethics of it, with this kind of regional expertise and specialization experiences. I cannot make that correlation. Neither I see in the immediate future, at the very least, from my personal perspective, I'm speaking of, in the immediate future, I don't see this is very much impacting on what's going on right now in a very primal and primitive way. So we are actually seeing, as you have said, today's World Refugee Day. So we have come up with our own statistics and data and some surveys on sociocultural issues, as well as the sheer numbers that we are facing now. That is unprecedented. We are looking at 120 million displaced as of today, as was announced today, but also some surveys that are showing us quite interesting sociological things. So we need to actually connect these dots. And in that sense, AI, I think, could be very helpful for us to understand a very complex situation before us, to resolve for more long-lasting solutions that can be done. You have touched, Frederick, upon the deep fakes, and the fight against that. Could be one area that can bring everyone with using AI for good as you put it so well in the summit that you have hosted very recently. So, and I would love to learn more. But also in my personal experience, in between different UN positions, political sense as well, politicians, representatives of people, if we see them that way, as a parliamentarian, we have fought against a lot of this, of this, as well as in this domain of humanitarian and refugee world. Hate speech, xenophobia is spread through fake news, deep fakes, and you name it, misinformation, disinformation, that is really is spread like a virus. So we could see that in our analysis worldwide, globally. I don't want to yet share so many details here, but just superficially speaking on it, I see the connections there as well. One last thing, working in the unknowns, I know I've seen that was one thing. The one time that I have come so close to the business world was when I was given an opportunity to have some midterm education at the Harvard Executive School. And that is when I got some lectures from the business school as well. And the scenario making that was being presented, and I've learned really so much through that exchange, was actually how the business world did not necessarily know how to act in the unknown. Whereas I felt, along with another Venezuelan politician, so strong on that front, that that is when we understood with our lecturers and the classmates that how much in silos we were. We know how to operate in the unknown. The nature of humanitarian and political work is that 24 hours is too long to presume anything or project anything, whereas other sectors may not work that way. So, and I think there's always good coming out of a collaboration. In the remarks by the professor just closing the last session, I've heard that an individual, a participant with refugee background was actually in the AI subgroup, working group, which actually changed the whole thing. So that is the kind of collaboration I think we should look at. Maybe those who knows how to operate in the unknown should be included in those planning and more systems that are not necessarily working together. So those are some of the initial thoughts that I came up with.
Thank you. To build on that, maybe I'll stay with you for the second round of questions. Our three panelists are all here because their organizations are bringing together new types of initiatives, convenings or coalitions that stretch beyond their own silos and start to bridge partnerships and collaborations in their respective spaces. So I would love to dig a little bit more on the drivers behind that and what you're seeing as a result of these. They're all relatively new or have relatively new elements to them. So I think it'll be quite interesting to hear your early thoughts. So Safak, perhaps I'll stay with you on the Global Refugee Forum that has been convened twice now, I believe, and you've been quite a driver behind the shape and direction that forum takes. What drove your organization to start this new initiative and this new style? I know you work in partnership by default, but as you said, working with people in different ways of thinking and in different contexts can be challenging. So how have you brought together this forum? What are your motivations for that? And how do you see it shaping going forward?
Thank you, Kitrona. Well, Global Refugee Forum is an example of what I was trying to also wrap up my random ideas together just now. It's a new or modern way of multilateralism, where we bring beyond in the old school ways of international organizations. We used to be very state-oriented. But looking at the contemporary issues that we are facing, no single actor can face with it on its own. So realizing that in this unknown space with so many challenges being faced, so it started with a policy building process, actually. That may be each agency, specialist agency that is also represented here with my esteemed panelists here, but it starts in a different way. Ours was a journey first to look at the policy, a global updated policy line, which is called Global Compact on Refugees, which was consulted with many different stakeholders for a period of 2 years. After those consultations, it was actually affirmed by member states at the General Assembly in December 2018 by utmost majority. So that global policy updated contemporary visionary lighthouse as a policy guided us and embedded that has it embedded in itself a mechanism that is called Global Refugee Forum. That's a pledging conference in its shortest explanation. Which helps us to bring together all the stakeholders around the table to commit, to question, to revisit, and to have a space to collaborate. At the very core of it is the principle of meaningful participation of refugees and displaced persons to have a voice. And beyond that, all the actors that has not necessarily been recognized before, but have been actually through their umbrella organizations pushing for a seat at the multilateral systems, has been given a dedicated paragraph on their role, recognition, which allowed actually with this kind of how did it work? I mean, in this recent one, the second Global Refugee Forum, which is hosted every 4 years, and there's in the middle of it every 2 years, there's also a stock-taking exercise that's done that is called high-level officials meeting, where everybody reports back, and then later on we again convene a Global Refugees Forum to report back as well as to collect good practices that is being done. So we are like a catalyzer. The last one to speak of in December has actually convened 4,200 delegates. 450 of them were actually organizations from every different sector, including international financial organizations, corporations, private sector, religious leaders and their institutions at the global level, faith-based organizations, refugees themselves, which I have already spoken to, stateless persons. So a very multi-stakeholder approach. Host countries, donor countries, 168 countries were represented officially. So this was basically a fresh breath in the current environment where peace and security is very much under threat. Far too many humanitarian crises are happening one after another. And while we are not even having time to catch our breaths, this was a fresh breath, a breather time where we could see actually responsibility sharing principle was very much applied under different thematic areas, be it with climate change and displacement issue, under the peace building and conflict prevention issue that's directly relevant. We are the consequences, we're dealing with the consequences of war and conflict, or under the thematic areas of livelihoods, where private sector and employers could be the driving force, supporting large refugee hosting countries to invest both in host communities and refugee skills in the employment sector as well. So there were so many innovative spaces where we could bring all these voices, influential voices, and stakeholder groups together as an equal vis-a-vis each other. So we're very proud of that. The lessons learned on it is that, if I may maybe conclude on that, is basically we need to make sure that the momentum is there, political will continues to support it. But there needs to be certainly much more need to focus on the root causes of displacement. That is definitely a lesson learned. So we will actually pay much more. I mean, we will actually try to focus and drive our stakeholder groups, global partners, towards that area more and more, so that we could also contribute to the prevention. With that, I would like to stop here. I think I've taken too much space, but
Not
thank you.
at all. Thank you so much. I would like to hand over to Fred on that, which is almost taking an opposite angle from taking the AI for Good Summit, which really looked at innovation, looked at contributions to the SDGs as you described, and this year adding a Global Governance Day, which is a much a different kind of topic, let's say, to the energy that's brought at the AI for Good Summit. So I'd love to hear how that went, your motivations behind starting this Global Governance Day, which I think you alluded to already in your previous comments, and how you see that evolving alongside the innovation piece of AI for Good.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, so AI for Good, like I said earlier, was basically built on the premise that the SDGs are not in great shape, and the SDGs are probably in worse shape after the pandemic. And, we did a certain mapping of how AI and other digital technologies can positively impact the SDGs, and almost 80% of the SDGs can be positively impacted. So that was really the premise on, why we create AI for Good. Of course, being mindful of the unintended consequences of AI. Of course, top of mind is job loss due to automation, but also a lot of concerns when it comes to ethics in AI, when, machines and systems and processes are making decisions on our behalf. What kind of data sets are they basing those decisions on? Are they, inclusive? Are we being mindful of bias? Of course, issues around safety, security, privacy. Are these sustainable? Are these solutions being built in a sustainable manner? Are they underscored by human rights? And very importantly for ITU, are these solutions going to help to bridge the digital divide or further divide the digital divide? So if you're looking at, I think one of the best parts of my job is there's no shortage of high potential AI for Good use cases that come across my desk. If any of you would sort of state a problem, I can guarantee I've been pitched a solution to fix that problem. But the question is, how do you know if these solutions work equally well on men or women? Do they work on people with different skin colors? Do they work well on children or the elderly or persons with disabilities? Do they work well in, low resource settings or conflict zones where basic things like electricity or 5G that we take for granted are real issues? So these are not things that occur naturally to the fast-moving tech industry and the startup industry. I think the approach so far, or the evidence so far, has been we'll build it and we'll fix it later. But these are things that our community thinks deeply about. So how do you really ensure that these solutions are scalable, they're very inclusive, they're sustainable, they're mapped to the SDGs, they respect human rights? And I think through the AI for Good platform, we sort of infuse this kind of discourse and culture and way of thinking among the tech industry, but also among academics and civil society and different stakeholders, which I don't think we should take for granted would have happened naturally without AI for Good. I think another issue is also, what is good? So what's good for me might not be good for you. Different countries, different communities have different values and different understandings of what's good. And I think we could probably stay in this room all day or maybe even all week and not come up with a common understanding of what is good. But luckily, we have the SDGs as basically a framework. So that's basically the lighthouse, if you will, of AI for Good. So at least you can get one big decision-making factor out of the way, which is what is good and aligning these solutions with the SDGs. So simply put, the goal of AI for Good is to really identify these practical applications of AI to advance the SDGs, but more than that, figure out how to scale these solutions and make sure they're fit for purpose and they could actually be applied in developing countries and places that wouldn't be the obvious first choice for the fast-moving tech industry. And how do we do that? Well, first of all, we can't do that alone. So that's why we have 47 UN sister agencies as partners. I mean, ILO, your agency, partners of AI for Good since the beginning. And, through that, they contribute knowledge, expertise, and not only on sort of webinars and talks and events, but also we've created a number of pre-standardization efforts. So for example, we have best practices and standards and benchmarks in AI and health developed with the World Health Organization and WIPO now. The same thing we're doing with AI in agriculture with FAO. We're doing the same thing with natural disaster management and AI with WMO and UNEP. We're doing autonomous driving work with UN and ECE. So I think AI for Good in ITU has emerged as a kind of catalyst for, partnerships where you have a UN agency that sets standards, that's technical in nature, but then we'll work with UN agencies who are, have the expertise in different domains, whether it be healthcare or agriculture or disaster management or climate change. And then also because of ITU's unique membership model, we have 1,000 members from industry and academia, as well as our member states. Then we can bring in that technical expertise that we often take for granted, but it's not always there. And maybe another thing that our community would say is that AI is too important to leave to the experts alone. So great efforts have been made to bring, obviously the experts. We have the top AI minds of the world, top industry executives from all the big name tech companies, but from all over the globe. Bringing civil society to the table, academia, NGOs, UN agencies, member states, but also, youth, the creatives, paying special attention to gender. So I really think, proactively, engaging and making sure that diversity happens, which again, we shouldn't take for granted. It's not natural. Has been an important part of the summit. And I think most people know AI for Good as an annual summit. And, that's great. Once a year, we meet in Geneva. But during the pandemic, we put our program online, and now we do something in the order of 160 online events per year. And that built a community of 35,000 people from 180 plus countries on this platform that we call the Neural Network, which is basically an AI-powered smart matching community platform where we run all of our webinars, but also it works as a kind of dating app, matching people according to their different needs. And then there's all types of networking features built into that. And that's also generated a number of collaboration efforts that are not really just, traditional sort of event-based things. So of course, we create standards, we create best practices, but we've launched a number of machine learning challenges, especially focusing on developing countries, where we basically create problem statements, we give them access to data and the compute platform. Sometimes we might have incentives in the way of prizes or cash to help motivate people to participate. And we've attracted close to 10,000 students from developing countries to work on these machine learning challenges in areas like GeoAI, 5G networks, agriculture, and really coming up with unique crowdsourced solutions that wouldn't emerge naturally. So how to use AI to detect landslides or deforestation, or reduce the energy consumption of 5G network, base stations in a city, for example. And on top of that, we've also done startup pitching competitions. So you have this huge AI startup ecosystem, and any startup that uses AI in a unique way to advance one or more of the SDGs basically qualifies to apply. There's a year-long sort of evaluation and pitching process, a bit like Shark Tank or Dragon's Den, whichever part of the world you're from. But in the end of the day, you do emerge with these like amazing practical solutions, mapped to the SDGs that are ready to be used. And that's been a good way of teasing out real solutions as well. So, moving from a summit to an online platform to a collaboration platform, and then last but not least, Governance Day, where, I think at one point you just attract too much attention and then the governments want to get involved, and that's what happened this year. But I think it was also very timely because that really, I think what was unique is a lot of these governance processes maybe can't claim to be the most inclusive. Developing countries certainly not at the table, civil society not at the table. Quite often there might be one or two UN officials there, but certainly not all 47 agencies. So I think just by opening it up and, proactively being extremely inclusive and diverse, that added a whole lot of value to the AI governance discussion. And there's still a lot of work to do, but at least, like I said in the opening statement, focusing on standards in service of policy and regulation, focusing on deepfakes. But then now I think we've created a model where we can start to take more of the headaches on, head on in the years to come. And I think I'll pause there because that's enough AI for good. Thank you.
Thank you. It's quite a journey and fascinating to hear how the platform has evolved. Rick, could I come to you? You're, I suppose, on the other end of that journey with the Global Coalition for Social Justice. Safak mentioned modern multilateralism, and I think the ILO was ahead of its time, perhaps, in having that multi-stakeholder engagement, the tripartite engagement from its inception. So unique amongst the UN agencies, but now it's going beyond those boundaries. And had huge engagement in this global coalition, which had its first inaugural meeting just last week. So I wondered if you could share with us, hot off the press, some of the takeaways. And it's early days in thinking around what action the coalition will take together, but any insights you might have on how it might move forward.
Okay, thanks very much for that opportunity. I'm going to try to do this in a way that is beyond an explanation and an advertisement for our particular initiative, because I think you're taking a kind of a more structural look at what kind of cooperation needs to happen and how this particular platform could move the needle on that here. So yes, you just heard about two examples of initiatives taken by intergovernmental institutions that attempt to reach beyond their own means of implementation, if I could call it that way, that to crowd in a larger set of commitment, resources, and the like. And I think the weight of both of them, if I interpret it correctly, and maybe I haven't, but is, many of these are focused on scaling resources to apply more resources beyond just whatever the government's put into these institutions. So very private sector, other types of institutions. You mentioned the pledging conference. You've got a remarkable constellation of technical and other types of engagement. This is all about scaling action, if you will. That's one type of way an international organization uses its platform to reach beyond its own means of implementation. Another, which you've asked about a bit, is on the normative side. And there's a bit of what I hear standard setting, but there's probably a big open question about how applicable that can be, how legitimate this standard, because you've got subsets of people doing standard setting. But there is a larger question, since international organizations are, for the most part, also create norms, and certainly we're a normative organization, about how you reach beyond your own networks to be able to improve the effectiveness of your norm creation process. And let me move now to a little bit of a discussion about this Global Coalition for Social Justice. This is another example of an IO, in our case the ILO, recognizing that while we are dedicated and have been for 100 years to promoting decent work and advancing social justice, we are principally a labor ministerial and social security agency intergovernmental framework with the social partners involved and at the table, as you alluded to, Katrona, unions and employer organizations at the table on everything, including the central part, which is norm creation. So any type of norm, in our cases, are conventions and recommendations, they go through this excruciatingly intricate dance of the three social partners and all the differences regionally among them, and coming to a consensus outcome. Occasionally having to take a vote, but basically the culture of the institution is a consensual, consensus building one. And even with that very interesting intergovernmental tripartite makeup, it is not multi-stakeholder in the way you were discussing things here earlier today. The civil society organizations beyond, the social partners are not part of the formal norm creating. They don't have a seat at the table, a vote if need be, and whatnot. But to achieve the vision of social justice and promoting decent work more widely, to achieve the goals of the institution, set up after all the turmoil following World War I and the Spanish influenza and the Bolshevik Revolution and the huge amounts of industrial strike activity in industrialized countries at the time, people then realized that we needed norms, right, to put a line under the brutality, if you will, and the inhumanity of much industrial production at the time, but you needed engagement and action as well. And so fast forward 100 years, there are a lot of aspects of this agenda that require not only norms and maybe updating of norms, but action. And so this global coalition is basically, it was formally approved 6 months ago. It was formally launched last week, and it has 280 plus governmental, trade union, employer organizations, civil society, academic institution, multilateral institution, regional institution partners. So it sort of expands the geometry of action and progress. And so, yes, social justice, a lot of parties see themselves in that. They affiliate with the notion. And the challenge is to turn that bundle of goodwill and intention into increased action or a new action in concrete ways. And so that'll be the challenge for the next year. Now that we've built this thing, it's mainly about action, I would say. There's not necessarily that much normative process, but there may be some pockets of norms, a little bit analogous to what you're describing in AI for Good, where we may get a wider set of forces willing to start working on norms where they're not well defined. And let me close this thing by, again, trying to link it a little bit to your discussion. Another way of looking at what I just said is for these kinds of institutions to get beyond their silos, beyond their swim lanes sometimes, as people refer to it. And yes, part of that is stakeholder. Part of it is reaching beyond your own, basically, parties who are the formal participants in your organization, your process. But part of it is content too. And let me take the AI issue as an example, because I know you spent some significant time parsing this challenge. We have been having quite an interesting and challenging experience this year. And I lead this within the institution, so it's sort of, I know it kind of personally, in getting the traditional AI governance or technology governance communities to properly understand and properly weight the labor/social justice dimensions and challenges of this issue. Because the tendency for many years, it's like everybody has a professional culture. The technology governance community has for years had a professional culture that has been focused more on the mainstream challenges in that domain, which are, some of them are human rights, some of them are like internet governance considerations and whatnot. They haven't been naturally focused on this wider set of labor governance issues. And let me very quickly, I'm just going to list the names of them, the kinds of labor market related governance issues that are absolutely central to AI regulation going forward, but are not really the normal domain of the traditional actors in the space as much as important as they are. Let me quickly, because some of them you may have hit, some of you have not. Worker surveillance, performance evaluation, the use of AI in performance evaluation, the use of AI in tasking, parceling out tasking to workers, OSH, occupational safety and health. You hear about that in factories and fulfillment agencies where workers are increasingly basically monitored and tasked, and then that places challenges on their safety and health, including mental health. The AI value chain itself, you see as a consumer you see the tool and what service it can provide, but actually it's not fully automated behind it. There's a tremendous human value chain, supply chain behind that, basically coding and entering data, and so the models can train. 150 or more million people, according to preliminary World Bank estimates, which I don't have a good deal of confidence in, but it's the only estimate I've seen of just how large that human value chain is. And this industry is not necessarily at the leading edge of corporate social responsibility or labor regulation and practices, if you will. Recruitment tools, these tools are applied at enhancing the productivity of recruiters and companies by filtering. Raises questions as well. Employee data protection. So I'm just giving you a list of, what is it, like 8 different issues. I could give you a few more as well, which are uncertain domains for regulation that require silos to be connected here, if you will. And that, I think that's an added dimension to this challenge that the task platform is looking at, because the international organization community is not wired, frankly, for interdisciplinarity, for cross-portfolio types of discussions about this stuff. And if I know Cedric and Budella and you could try to think about, okay, well, what contribution can the task platform potentially make, adding value to the international Geneva and whatnot. It's potentially this silo spanning aspect and multi-stakeholder aspect of this. We're naturally comfortable with multi-stakeholderism beyond tripartitism, I can tell you that. And all of our institutions are traditionally not super reflexively comfortable with that kind of dot connecting across the silos. And that's what a platform like this, in my mind, could potentially add value. Thanks.
Thank you. I would like to open up to any questions that are follow-ups or comments from the audience. Fast one at the back. Yes, we can take a few. Gentleman in the turquoise shirt.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Philip van Ganegem. Thank you very much for all the insights. A question, I think, for everybody, but perhaps more specifically for Richard. The AI world is developing further and further into what they call agentic systems, so agents. And there is many developments where these would be autonomous agents. There's companies that are developing consultants. There's companies that are developing developers. So at one point, the reflection from the ILO could be, this is actually a worker. Have you looked at that? What would be the implication if you would start having these autonomous entities, which we would not be able to tell any difference from, at least from a distance, from another worker? Thank you.
Interesting. We'll take a few. The woman right in front of me.
Hello. Hi, thank you for all of your interesting comments so far. So I just have a question about kind of the benefits of AI to society. I think earlier on in the introductory statements to the day, the speaker kind of made a comment about how AI was or data was the new gold, it was the new oil, and it was kind of a way of making money rapidly. And so my question is just on how can, what was the word? How can kind of AI be used as a global public good? How can we share the benefits of AI in a more equitable way in order to bring out lower middle income countries out of poverty, and as a way of maybe even reducing migration and conflict in the world?
Thank you. And I had promised the panelists the opportunity to ask questions of their fellow panelists. I wonder if we had any questions from each other while we're collecting them.
I have one for Rick, and it goes along the question of a gentleman as well. If you have these kind of AI agents, or basically this large amount of work being lost to automation, One of my favorite topics, which I have zero expertise on, is the idea of universal basic income or taxing automation and all these different sort of carrots and sticks to incentivize different behaviors. So yeah, I'd really be interested in learning Rick's opinions or ideas on, how we might handle a future with, let's say, mass automation and AI agents and how you would just basically capture that value and bring it back to society somehow.
My question was already asked. Actually, I was wondering the same thing as a question to pose to Frederick. So how could AI could be put into use for conflict resolution and prevention?
Great. I think we've got a good selection then. And I think a couple of those were heading for you, Rick, especially on AI agents.
These are good, big, challenging questions. So let's tackle this. I think you're asking, could we envision AI tools being considered as workers for purposes of kind of like the role of our institution, right? That's I understand your question. Now, let me say that first, the whole institution was founded on the principle that labor, working people, are not commodities. And by definition, an automated tool is basically a commoditizable entity, if you will. And so if the question that would arise to make it practical would be, okay, what labor protections does an AI tool merit? What's that tool's rights? Are they a person legally or morally? I think I'm answering your question here. I think that would be very problematic. Now, having said that, the spread of these tools without a proper governance framework, and I would add not just the public sector, the private sector as well, is highly problematic because it will increase the pressure on work to become commoditized because it becomes exchangeable increasingly with the soulless, clinical algorithmic tools. And so there is a huge question, there's several facets of a question about the implication of the spread of those tools, even if we're right and most of the opportunity is to augment rather than, the danger of total substitution. Still, the substitution effects are going to be significant, and the upskilling implications of that, because workers are going to be running harder to be able to keep pace in their profession with other people who are enabled by tools. And let me add a very quick subtext on the story is that in much of the developing world that doesn't have affordable or if any broadband access, the theoretical augmentation that people in that profession might have isn't there in reality because they don't have the enabling, the opportunity to get the stuff like, the ITU and others people work on. So there are huge social implications of the point you're raising, but I'm thinking that's more about, flesh and blood workers rather than algorithmic ones. And then let me try to come to the what do you do about the distributional effects more generally in society about this? And is UBI, universal basic income, a possible pathway, or taxing robots? These are things that have been kicked about for a decade or so. And my view, as Katrona and Cedric will know, is that that won't cut it. It's too simplistic and silver bulletish a type of reaction. First, very practically, UBI of any significant spread and application in society will be so fiscally enormous a burden that it's impractical, even for rich countries, let alone for. It works in a particular circumscribed areas, but if you really want to scale that as a major piece of economic policy, the numbers just don't make it. And by the way, the G20 this year under the Brazilian leadership, they've been kind of stirring the pot on this issue. They've put in front of the G20 finance ministries and central bank governors this proposal of a minimum wealth tax on everybody as a way to fund more of whatever you do, whether it's UBI or anything else. interesting. The numbers are large. The practicalities of that are basically, not likely to make it happen anytime soon. My response to this, this is related to the book that I published a couple of months ago, is that rather what you need to do as a society, as an economic policy advisor and a cabinet and a government, is to realize that there are a whole series of institutional levers that really influence the distributional outcomes and the sustainability and the resilience of an economy. And this goes, yes, it includes, training and education, and it includes fiscal transfers like better social protection systems, which are the usual things that people mention when they talk about the distributional effects of globalization or technology. But actually, there's been a failure of imagination in the economics profession, in my view, and that's reflected in the way international economic organizations operate, and that we fail to see that there are a whole series of domains of domestic economic policy that have a huge bearing on the different facets of living standards, of people's living standards at the household level. And so I kind of parse that in this book, and I make an argument that should be treated, economics, as an ecosystem, as a function, what I call an aggregate distribution function. And my view of the answer to your question is that both for this reason, algorithmic automation and its potential disruptive effects, but also because of the green transition, the net zero transition, and the basically diminishing returns from traditional fiscal stimulus that we used in COVID and after and the diminishing returns from export-led production in a world that's fragmenting in the world economy, the world needs a new growth and development model, and that taking much more seriously this panoply of labor, infrastructure, corporate governance, financial system, education and training, skilling, this whole panoply of institutional domains of economic policy, and realizing that together they're the underlying income distribution system of a market economy, and placing as much emphasis on them as we have traditionally done on stoking growth through the production function. That is probably a more appropriate answer to the secular challenge that AI presents, as opposed to a silver bullet of trying to cut a check for everybody and trying to find the money for it.
Thank you, Rick. Fred, would you like to take a stab at the data as the new gold question, and how can we look at this more as a global public goods?
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for that answer. That was great. Thank you. So I think the question was two parts. One was sort of, AI for good use cases, or how is it good for society? And then the data, as, the cliche about data is for oil. Maybe not such a cliche, actually. I mean, like I said before, I've seen many, positive use cases of AI. I think the ones that emerge with the highest potential will probably be in the area of healthcare, and in basically distributing the benefits of healthcare, across not only developed countries but developing countries as well. Especially looking at your mobile device. I mean, depending on what application you have now, you could probably detect skin cancer if you have high blood pressure or diabetes, or what kind of cough you have just by the sound of your cough. So there's all these applications. One of the big challenges is, how do you compare apples with apples? And if you were, let's say, a mayor or running a hospital, or your health minister, you have all these high potential health applications, and there's no current system of evaluation to, basically test the efficacy of these apps in a way that you would have. Let's say, for example, if you're developing a drug, you have to put it through the FDA, costs billions of dollars, many years. I mean, there's really a rigorous system before it gets to the market. But you have these sort of high potential AI applications emerging on the App Store, or Android, or whatever system you're going for, with very little oversight, except for the fact that it matches the criteria of Apple or Android, or Huawei, or whatever. And so one of the things we developed with the WHO is basically an AI for health benchmarking framework, where you can evaluate and test the efficacy of AI for health applications in this kind of like end-to-end development cycle, so that if you were, in a position where you had to evaluate these apps and maybe start to implement them in some kind of healthcare program, or in a hospital or a city, you could actually, run it through the system and I wouldn't say it's quite the AI version of the FDA for health, but it goes a long way to developing standards and benchmarks and frameworks and also terminology and taxonomy. So you start to have a kind of language and a way of looking at these things systematically where you can start to make good choices. So I think that's an important part of and that's just in the context of health, but that need, I think, is there, whether you're talking about education or agriculture or climate change or all these other solutions that are emerging. And when it comes to data, I think one of the biggest bottlenecks preventing AI for good solutions scaling globally is actually data sharing. So I can't tell you the number of times we've been in meetings like this, and then I'll ask a question, who in the room has data? All the hands go up, and then the next question is who's willing to share it, and we all stare at their shoes, and that's the end of the discussion. So there are ways to share data in a way that's still useful, but still respects privacy. And you have solutions like homomorphic encryption and different ways of sharing data. They're not really deployed at scale right now, and again, I don't think the incentives are there to do so. But I think if you can solve that data sharing piece of the puzzle, then you could really start to get the kind of scale that you're looking for as well. And especially when it comes to developing countries, like I said before, I think they potentially have the most to gain from AI, but potentially the most to lose, depending how it's managed. And if you look in the context, let's say in East Africa, for example, you do have examples of where, for example, they've been leading in mobile payments for many years now, where they sort of leapfrog decades of infrastructure and regulations, and just out of necessity, and all of a sudden, they're using mobile payments in markets for many years now and leading in that way. So it is possible to sort of leapfrog those decades of infrastructure that maybe developed countries have built upon. But that also has to be carefully managed, and that's one of the things we're looking at AI for Good, and also what ITU members look to ITU to provide guidance on. But no, I do agree. Without AI needs data to run, and then to have data you need digitization, and to have digitization you need connectivity, and then going back to developing countries, that level of digitization is just not happening yet. And you can't take it for granted that you have these sort of data sets that might come from Silicon Valley or Shenzhen or where have you. Oh, don't worry, it's sanitized and synthetic data, you can use it. But, having data sets that are localized and, have the culture built into it and are inclusive and are fit for purpose for that part of the world, you can't underestimate the value of that. And that's just simply not built yet. So that's, I think, probably the biggest bottleneck is the data sharing issue, but also creating those inclusive data sets that are fit for purpose for different cultures in different parts of the world.
Thank you. With an eye on the time, I'd like to give a quick final word to Suffolk, if that's all right. And I wanted to come back to you on the point you made about your space, the humanitarian space, the refugee space, really being at the forefront of dealing with uncertainty on a daily basis. What would be your hopes for how we collectively respond as a multilateral, multi-stakeholder system to these rising challenges of uncertainty going forward?
Well, maybe it will be a jargon, but in an interagency level, we are already coordinating and cooperating on many fronts, bringing our expertise to the front, since there has been that reform of, one UN system in each country as well. We have coordination, looking at local issues together as well. So, but I hope that you will not hate me for using that jargon, but I still cannot find something to replace it. But really, the main thing is falls down to humanitarian development and peace nexus to be strengthened. And I think the HD is working much better now that development partnerships are hand in hand. That brings also different silos together. We are very much confident and taking more confident steps towards that kind of collaboration. But the peace angle of overall UN system needs to be strengthened, and the peace actors needs to be brought from the margin to the core, in my view. in my view, if that kind of synergy is not there, if one leg, one pillar of the UN, the very existence of it is depending on it as well, is not invested enough, then the other pillars are also weakened by it. Directly our domain, humanitarian domain, which is basic the aftermath of the crisis. So in my view, we're the most visible in that sense, because as we live in this uncertain, unknown, and crisis world, and frontliners. But to be able to do that, we need much more of that kind of synergy created. So the three in it, because it sums it in a way, HDP nexus we call it, but it turned into a jargon. But it truly needs to be looked at in creating a trio strategies and strengthening that kind of systematic collaboration, in my view.
Thank you so much. That brings us really neatly back to the kind of thinking we've been doing today in terms of looking holistically at the system, the roles it plays, and where the points of intervention could be to strengthen the system as a whole. So thank you so much for bringing us home. I would like to say a huge thank you to our panelists. And to invite Cedric and Gudela for just a few closing thoughts to wrap us up for the day. Cedric, over to you. You have them in you. Just say thank you then.
I'm standing
Closing words.
So I think it's a very comfortable position. So I hope that thank you to the panelists to bring this very concrete, kind of sources of hope, but also actually, remaining sources of challenge. So you still need to still can keep your job. I think there's still many things to address. I hope that actually we do it also as a mission of the platform is to really connect people and to help to consider things or to approach things slightly differently. So if even one or two new ideas, two ways to look at things have reached you during this day, this is a mission accompli for us. But at that stage, I guess you want to have, refreshment to think of other things. I'm going to seize this occasion to thank all the teams on the task, and Kitrona did that already this morning, but of course she has not thanked herself. And so I think here in the name is, it's very pleasant to be a co-chair of a platform when you have someone like Kitrona that runs it, because we don't show up, we only show up in a good moment like that, but everything works very smoothly. And I think she connects the dots. So thank you for her, but thank you for her. Gudela, I think Gudela, it's also the pleasure, Gudela joined, the new co-chair. So we also connect in different worlds. We're two co-chair from the Goethe Institute. Now we have one from the Goethe Institute and one from ETH Zurich. So it's not only two different institutions. Those of you in Switzerland, the speaking part and the French speaking part go well along, but they're very different. And she comes from a very different angle. So thank you for stay 2 days in Geneva, and you have the very last word, I think.
Okay. Thank you very much. Oh, it's this one. I still haven't learned. This is so embarrassing. Okay, anyway, thank you very much. And thank you very much actually for bringing me into this amazing organization called Task. And to closer, I think, actually to a more macro view on lots of things that we look at more micro and more technology driven, actually. I mean, being at a technical university. And thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to broaden sort of my pet topic of, yes, how will AI change us and how should we actually change AI? I think we need to talk more about how we should actually change AI than we have today. But I think we heard from the panelists various ways of how that can be done. Thank you very much. And cheers.
Thank you both. I wanted to close with a final recognition of the fact that it's Global Refugee Day, and we've run this summit as a sister summit to the Global Migration Summit, which is being held next week by MIT Emerging Talent, NAMAL, and the Karam Foundation. The program is largely online, but with a suite of events all around the world taking place from the 24th to 28th June. So do check that out to continue following this topic.